There were packs of kids out on social media during the pandemic that were doing it. It was wonderful. Those are the videos I watched. So we're live?
Okay.
Right.
Let's get started. We need to have a chairman, and I'd like to nominate Wendy.
Neil?
Oh,
Pledge of Allegiance, right?
yeah, I should do the Pledge of Allegiance. Yeah,
Don't we,
sure.
don't like all the committees do it? No? Oh, I always thought that they all did. I apologize. Only they're the only ones? I always thought they all did. Okay.
I'm not adverse to it at all. So I would like
I'm just accustomed to starting every meeting with it, so I'm sorry, it's ingrained. I'll leave it up to you guys.
No,
We
if
can
you
put
want
it
to
to
do
a
it,
vote.
that's without objection.
Good? All right, sorry.
to be the leaders that we are.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now I reiterate my nomination of Wendy to chair this, and I do that because she's chaired the school board, she knows how to run a meeting, and she's also conversant with the right-to-know law, which I think is going to be important for this committee.
I'll second.
Any other nominations? And by
tried.
acclamation, congratulations.
Thank
The
you.
meeting is now yours. Start running it.
All right, welcome to the kickoff of the Ethics Committee, round two. We know that there was a committee before that has done so much great work. We're hoping to take advantage of that and build upon it rather than starting all over again. I believe that's the consensus that I heard, yes? Okay, so for the kickoff meeting, obviously we can't boil the ocean and solve everything, but there's some basic housekeeping pieces that we need to figure out. Firstly, we're gonna need a secretary to keep minutes. We probably should do that right away before I keep blabbering on. So do we have any motions for who could be secretary?
I'd like to nominate Eileen.
We're gonna keep.
Second.
Oh, God. I'm gonna give you the, I'm a summarizer. So
That's
as
all that's
long,
necessary.
as long as you're okay with a summary, I'm fine with providing summary.
The only thing that minutes have to have is motions and the results of motions.
Sure.
Anything else is optional.
Okay?
Anybody who spoke before the board, probably.
I think it would be prudent to do that, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't be necessary.
Right. Okay. Would you, so do we need to vote on any other nominations?
There was a second, right?
There was a second. Discussion? No other, okay. So, hearing no others, Eileen, would you be willing to take that? on?
Sure.
Excellent, thank you. All right, my one other question, just for my head, because I'm a process nerd, is Robert Rules of Order, do we want to do motion seconds as part of this committee to keep things flowing? Or because this is more of a discussion of ethics, is that too formal? What are y'all's thoughts on that?
If I may, I think Robert's Rules is a good boundary. However, it can be extraordinarily particularized and can be used in ways that aren't productive to moving agendas forward. And also, what I would suggest is that the chair use similar to what you've done on the board, a slightly modified version. I do believe that having agenda items, having issues introduced, and then having an opportunity for discussion where the chair calls the point or calls the question at some point is helpful in moving agenda items along.
Sure.
So I do believe that a modified version is fine, but I would not want to get bogged down in the actual English tradition.
Right.
I agree.
Okay, I was gonna call you out either way, because you've been on so many committees. That sound fair? That works for people? Okay, good. So modified Robert rules, we have a chair, we have a secretary. I did see Luke mention something that we are supposed to do a public report or something in the spring. What do you know about that?
Well, so when I reviewed what I found from, or was provided from the previous board, there are some requirements in there, and I have a whole list of questions that I came up with. But one of the immediate responsibilities, or I should say not immediate, one of the time-sensitive ones is called out that we will have a meeting in the spring wherein we brief. So, but prior to getting there, I think what we need to do, honestly, is to establish where are we right now with the introduction of, this page 1 is appears to be, of course, the final draft date that I have is '05. I believe it was voted on in '06, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have, and I couldn't find it on the town website, the ethics guidelines.
What I have is something that was from May 14th, 2006.
Okay, so that would probably be what was voted on, right?
All right, so that's this part, that's part 2.
Right.
And then, so that was May 14th that it was voted in, and that makes sense. So in
This is-
addition to that, there was this, which is one that purports to require all employees of the town, all committee members, et cetera, to sign what is essentially the guidelines. And so my question was, basically, where are we right now? Have we been using any guidelines for any employees? Is this a figment? I was provided this by the town clerk,
Okay.
so,
That must be the same as this, because this was approved March 14th, which was town meeting, 2006.
okay, and that's, so that's,
That
I assume that's the
Slightly
same.
different formatted, but,
It's
Yeah,
different
it does-
type,
it
but it
looks
may be
very-
the same
right.
thing.
okay. All right, so I'm going to pull myself back and focus, because I think there's a lot of really good discussions there, and I want to make sure we capture them. So having no agenda, we know we want to talk about the meeting. We want to talk about where we are now. And when you say where we are now, you're talking about, do we have a form that currently is being used by committee members and?
well, essentially, where are we in total with the program? Was it ever implemented? Do we
Okay.
have people on file that have already signed acknowledgement? Do we have a contingent of employees and committee
Okay,
members today
got
who
it.
don't?
I can tell you that as a member, I think, of the Finance Committee, I signed one of these.
Okay.
I think also as a member of the Planning Board, I signed one of these. I don't know that the selectmen signed these.
Well, and that is part and parcel of what we have to handle, because it seems like part of the education thing is gonna be to first establish that everybody knows what the guidelines are, right?
Right, well, there's the education and there's the making sure people have signed on to the piece, right? And then there's the reporting out, right, to the selectmen. And then,
I kind of broke it out by each of the individual
Sections,
areas,
yeah.
sections, 'cause it's helpful for me to
sure.
digest a little bit more.
All right, so where we are now, we know that finance committee signs it, we don't believe the selectmen sign it. How would we get that information? Is it can someone, there's how, right? We write each one of those boards, and we talk to Naomi, and she tells us who signs these things. And then there's the, who's gonna go and do those actions, right? So, do you happen to know who signs those?
So it's in our onboarding package,
Okay,
and the Department of Labor has done an audit, and most everybody that's here has one. Even like when, I'll just use Jack Neely, they asked for his, and we found his in there, he had one too.
As a selectman,
Yeah.
did all the selectmen sign?
Yeah, because they have a package of onboarding too, because we have to pay them, so we need some information to pay them with all taxes and things like that. So
Could it-
they get the same, very smaller package, because there's no insurance stuff, there's no other things that go in a regular onboarding package.
So, have all town employees and all elected officials,
If you'd like, I just offer this.
Yeah.
They're located in the files within the finance office, because that's where Department of Labor goes for audits. So I can ask her to take our current roster, everybody we have, and make sure we all have copies. Do you need a copy, or just want it verified they have one?
the only thing I think I would like to know is that everybody has, or,
But I can go through, starting at the selectmen, down to me, down to all the offices, down to everything.
committees too.
We can, so committees, Maureen should have the committee ones, but we'll work together on it, where it's all about. But the payroll part, we have them upstairs.
So as far as you know, though, everyone has signed.
I can tell you my I son, always say who's a that, part-time but- employee, signed it.
He signed it? as
As a
part?
part-time
How old
employee.
is
He, at the time that he signed it, he was,
Parks kids, so they all have
yeah, 15, 16, 17, he's always signed
Okay,
it.
so basically everybody has signed
Okay.
it.
I have not.
All right, no, I haven't seen it
one.
either.
No, I
but-
said as far as the employees.
No, I understand, that was just sort of a follow-on, that we're gonna have to square ourselves away on that.
You're an elected official,
I am,
and you haven't signed it.
I have not.
And
I was sworn
I'm an
in,
official, I have not signed it either,
you're just for this committee, or you elected for something else somewhere else?
just for this committee.
It's just the first night.
Right.
There you go, just letting you know.
I am elected, but my other position is not with the town, it's with the school board.
Right, and we
So
have our
it's not
own
the same.
ethics process.
So this
Sign.
doesn't apply to school.
Correct.
Correct. School's a little different. We have an ethics policy for elected officials. We have it, for employees, there's an actual form they must sign, but not for elected officials. So,
Suzanne, you probably ought to get a copy of this from Naomi or from Maureen and sign it. You don't have,
It's online.
it's online?
Where is it on the site?
If
I
you
could
go to
not find it.
Fast, go to Find It Fast. I'll see if I can do it.
Let's see if I can get there. No, that's not what I wanted. Stop. That's not what I wanted.
I think I Googled it, and that's how I found the link.
Have you signed one?
No, I have not.
Because you're not a town, you've never held a town office, never
Right.
been on a town committee.
Correct.
A new life,
Yeah,
new
we're-
chapter.
Exactly, yeah,
So if I search ethics on the front page, it won't come up, right? Or it will come up?
no.
You can try it.
Ethics Committee Agenda, Ethics Committee 2023, Code of Ethics, there it is.
Yeah, I think, and then the back page has the signature line. I think it's a two-page form.
Front and back, yep.
That's the form.
You've signed one, right?
Couple times, yeah.
Naomi, once a person signs one of these, a town employee, do you ever ask for a second signature if he switches positions?
We haven't.
So if a person leaves one board where he signed it and goes on another board, he doesn't have to sign it a second time? Wouldn't seem to be a reason to, because, okay.
If I might, the only time I would see a potential exception to that is if somebody moves from a non-fiduciary role to a fiduciary role, that it might be different. I don't know, again, I'm just looking at what we've got in front of us and going from
I
previous
think that's probably a good
experience.
action item too, to sort of figure out who is supposed to sign it and when it should happen and where it's filed, like having that information on, for us at least, to be,
Yep.
One thing I don't see here is I see the form that people have to sign, I don't see the implementation information from that was passed by the town.
The
So-
implementation information,
So the second so in the package I received from the town clerk, the front page was that form that I already showed you that you have a copy of that was voted on in May, or you provided me. Then there was the ethics code implementation, pages 2 and 3, that talk about the initial establishment of this committee, talks about staggering the positions in until 2007, et cetera, et cetera.
wait a second. I have copies, I think, of the two documents that I mentioned.
oh, the one that the gentleman shared with you.
Yeah, this says ethics code violation complaint, and it's a whole form, you fill it out and date it. And on the back, investigation of complaints by the Weare Ethics Committee. They lay out the process, and this is a request for a written advisory opinion.
So what you
Let me-
have and what Luke has is completely different, so it'd be great if everyone sort of,
I wouldn't say they're completely different. I think what
No?
this is I think this came first, and they
And then they
developed
formed that
those
one.
documents
Okay,
out of
okay.
it. So what I'm trying to do is put the puzzle together to say, okay,
Yeah.
this is how they're gonna create it. What do we already have in front of us in terms of forms,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of processes, standards?
exactly.
And there are some interesting, I don't know if they're straight up contradictions, but minor conflicts in some of the language here that, I think is gonna fall to us to sort some of this.
So I would love a copy of that at some point. I'm looking at it electronically.
Naomi, can you make copies of stuff now?
This is it right here. This is the,
Is that the
that's the one you
three-pager?
just gave me. That's the 2 pages of the
Formation of committee
implementation.
implementation.
And then the code of ethics with the preamble is the other one that you have, probably want to use that one since it's that was the one that was actually decided on, yes.
And did you have anything else?
I don't have anything else.
2 or
for-
3 pager, or you think?
No, what I'm saying, page 1, page 2,
Okay.
page 3.
Some of these are back as well as front? Thank you.
That would be a big help, right, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I wonder,
And I don't know this, so I don't know who I know the process in the federal sector, I don't know the process in the town sector all right, so this process has been here for a while. We know that the forms are kept out there obviously now, so there is some, if you will, managerial oversight of people getting this signed off and all. But we've got a big gap between that, what I'm wondering, I guess, is can we go back and recreate the minutes from those original meetings so that we can find out what they actually did historically and build, as you were talking about from there? I couldn't find any minutes
so
for
one of the things I
anything.
heard, Eileen said she watched them.
I had found, no, I didn't watch them, I found them.
Oh, okay.
You found minutes?
I found minutes, I dug. I'm trying to remember, I may have printed them out, but I can, in between meetings, try to find them. But I did find, and it was, they called their first meeting to order very quickly, realized that one of the people who had been, become part of the committee couldn't be part of the committee. He stood down, and then they started talking about reporting in potential conflicts, to be able to have sort of a framework to move forward from,
I
that
mean, their conflict.
their personal conflicts of interest, so that there would be a real clear recusal, opportunity if things came across. So they started with that, and then, moved to building a structure. And then, they did a lot of work around structure there. I didn't see any information about actual complaints that came in, and most of the information that I read was about structure and figuring that out. So,
So don't, again, ignorance, don't we have a repository of what committees have done historically that would be maintained by
I
the
mean,
town
there's
terms of
somewhere?
minutes on the
minutes.
count. I guess I meant to
there, and this is a hypothetical on my part, so bear with me. So, when depending on what they had in front of them, right? There are certain things that, to me, clearly, let's say we received a complaint hypothetically about a town employee. To me, that would be, there's a complaint about the town employee. This is probably not necessarily the venue to have that discussion. I'm going to forward that to the town administrator, because that is the body that should be dealing with employee complaints, right? So it may be, and they may come back to us and say, we'd like to consult, if it fell into an ethical domain. But if it was clearly a policy violation or something related to employment, I don't know that we would necessarily be the appropriate venue to be having that conversation, because employees are afforded privacy about personnel matters, right?
What happens if someone came in and said, I have an ethical complaint about a town employee?
That would be a different story, as long as it wasn't related to their employment, right? So if there's a clear policy,
So I have some experience with some of these overlaps, and of course, there are, there's a difference between personnel policies, practices, and procedures, and the complaint generate, and the process of following, I do think that there may be overlaps. Obviously, if what we're talking about is a job performance issue, someone didn't answer the phone, someone, whatever, those are one set of circumstances, but I think that the committee would have to review it on a case-by-case basis to say, we may have to send it back to the department head, and
Sure, but what I'm getting at with that is whether or not somebody put that name to paper in a minute,
Sure,
you know what I mean?
right.
Rather than,
right. So, and I don't know how far ahead this is getting, but there's supposed to be an established process by which people can file complaints. And I would assume that the filing of the complaint, the initial discussion of that would be really kind of high level. We have a complaint, and then the board would discuss whether or not they thought this was the venue to deal with it, express their rationale. If not, and move it on, and then that, whoever the moving party was would, express their displeasure or whatever. But there are several stipulations in here that we need to pay attention to, including there's a stipulation in there that says anybody who files an ethics complaint must have exhausted all other forms. I don't know what that means, and that, one of the things that, so I dealt with grievance processes for 30 years, and language matters. And a lot of the language in here is a little ambiguous, and one of the things that I think that we should do as a committee is get a solid foundation, probably from the town attorney, on some of the definitions that we're dealing with, in order to understand our own
Right.
boundaries.
Right, and I think you're right. I mean, well, obviously, we're not gonna figure this whole form out tonight, especially since I'm just now reading it, but, I think before we start,
I was just checking if these were for me.
oh, yes. Before we start having people come before us, we need to have our ducks in a row to make sure that we understand, right?
I think, I agree with you, but I think it's very important that we protect the reputations of the people who come in with a problem
Absolutely.
and the people who are the subject of the problem.
Right,
And
and
so,
that's one of the things that I think is critical, right? So whether, if it's an ethics for an employee or an elected official, in the school, it would be a non-public, right? So you're having that initial discussion before their name is busted all over YouTube, right? I don't know what our process is for that, sorry.
I
interrupted you.
assume this is the right to know law. It's section C. Matters which, if discussed in public, would likely affect adversely the reputation of a person other than a member of this board,
Correct,
unless such person requests an open meeting. So that talks about the person who is the subject of the complaint.
right,
But what about the privacy of the person who raises the issue, number one, and then a person who comes in with a generic question, where there's no subject of the question, but is this kind of behavior ethical in the highway department? And if we're trying to encourage ethical behavior in the town, we need to make sure that we don't discourage people from bringing issues before us, because the very fact that they raised the issue affects their relationship with a whole bunch of other people.
certainly.
And I think that was dealt with in part on some of these forms, request for written advisory opinion, ethics code violation complaint, that the first ethics committee hammered out. So I hope this discussion goes on for several meetings, and that all of us read this, so when we come next time, we're in a position to say, they solved that, they got it right, or we need to make some changes.
So they have the form, which is critical, but does that mean someone can't ask a question, come before the board and say, I have a concern? We'd say you have to go fill out a form first, no.
We can do whatever we want.
Sure.
But I know that except if it's a very generic question, like, I don't understand what this, where's that form that we all signed? I don't understand what this, what's it called?
Okay, promote consistency, equity, and non-discrimination.
Yeah, no, this one, the town ethics thing that everyone's supposed to sign, and that Suzanne and Luke are going to have to sign. If somebody comes in with a question about this, what does this mean? I would think that could be done in open session. But if it gets,
So I have some experience with that on the school board. People would come, they'd have a concern, and what my job as a chair would be to listen and give them that venue. But as it starts to skirt into the line of, I think this is probably something we need to do in non-public, we would sort of try to, for their own benefit, not have it on camera, right? Sometimes that's a little bit too late, right? You would hope that, and in the school district, you talk to the teacher, you talk to the principal, you talk to the superintendent before you come to the board. So someone should have advised them by the time they got to us, but sometimes it doesn't happen, right?
and it may not happen here.
Right, for sure.
Okay.
And that raises the question of, when we were trying to schedule a meeting, one of the reasons that we got delayed was because we had to have the room where we were being televised, and the discussion was that all committees in town are supposed to be televised. That doesn't happen. That's not happening now. In fact, I met with the cable committee last week to talk about, well, could we get possibly another room wired so that, add double the flexibility of the meeting space. And while that's under advisement, they advised me that there are several committees in town that that are not videoed, that they don't record them. So one of that immediately raised for me, well, are these things that we're talking about advisory, or are they required? Are they shoulds or shalls, right? That's, and I don't know the answer to that, but those are the kind of things that I look for in inconsistencies in policy is, do we all understand, are we saying this should happen, it might happen, it may happen, or it shall happen, that there's some, expectation on people. So at any rate, just, that's another of my concerns is consistency and making sure that everyone understands that we all agree, these are as Neil said, here's what, the definition of is.
You tell he was in deep. We got to him.
And,
Words don't matter.
yeah, they do matter, and I think that's one of the things that we need to clarify up front. There are things in here, for example, one of the things I came across several times was confidentiality. We've already touched on that here. Well, in my world, in, classified communications, confidentiality has a different meaning than confidentiality here. There are confidentialities of HIPAA requirements, there are confidentialities of employee requirements. That's a pretty gray area. But, for example, one of the things with the state ethics, the state House Ethics Committee, one of the problems I see with that group is that everything's confidential from the point you file it until that committee decides it's not confidential anymore. And so there's no public resolution. If you file with them and they don't turn it loose, it's buried. That's a concern to me. So I do think that there's a necessary balance between public disclosure and the protection of individuals and, from just wanton abuse. And this also would go to another question I have is, do we have any history at all of this committee having gone through the process of evaluating any of these?
Did you find anything?
I didn't find anything.
So did they just form it and never made it through that process? If so,
I will try to find out by asking at least one surviving member of the
Right,
committee.
you said someone reached out to you, right, so you might be able to get that information. That would be extremely helpful. I think, to recap, because you said a lot of really important things.
sorry, caffeine.
I know when we met before the town, when we were running, the question came up, would we televise? And I think the sort of pledge and the intent was, if all the committees are doing that, we should do that. But we also spoke about, sometimes you have to have non-public for confidentiality purposes. So, are all the committees doing it? And if not, do we believe that we should have transparency when we're discussing ethics? And if so, when do we draw that line, right? So there's sort of 3 branch points there that I sort of pulled out of my hat. But, so that's a big piece, right? Then there's the clear definition of what is confidential when it comes to employees versus elected officials. There's the, how do we sort between complaints with employees as they're ours versus someone else's? And I think you're right, Neil, I think a legal, was it Neil?
Luke,
Luke, that we should have a legal, once we agree that we want to follow that process and refine it, because I don't know that we've had sort of consensus on that, but if that's the intent, then we should have legal review it, and then we can also decide on further meetings how we want to refine it, right?
Before you go the legal route, remember the consequences of doing that.
Oh,
Sure.
nice.
So if you know the answer to the question, and you know that your lawyer is going to answer it the way you want, go to your lawyer. But if you don't know the answer to
Sure.
the question, and you don't know what your lawyer is going to do, you've got to think twice.
Certainly
If,
because they
if,
can pin
if,
us.
if there are inconsistencies in this that Luke has talked about, I would think that before we go to a lawyer, we would want to see if we can resolve them in some way that we all agree on.
At least have a position.
Right. And then if the issue arises, it's likely that we will have legal support for a reasonable interpretation of our rules. Could have gone this way, it could have gone that way. Okay. So I would suggest that first we figure out what the issues are that we think are unclear and see if we can resolve them, and then make a decision as to whether or not we want a legal confirmation of our interpretation.
So, before we go there, do we agree in, that we want to start with that process?
So I was gonna follow up with a question directly to that point.
Sure.
Do we have the option? Was this language not adopted by the town?
But you're saying that there's a conflict, or there's a way to interpret, the way you're reading it, you see a potential conflict between A and B. Okay?
Indeed.
If that's the case, we need to discuss that and try to resolve it so that there isn't a conflict.
Understand that, but what I'm backing up to is the question
What
that
was on the
Wendy was
warrant?
asking is what was on the warrant? Are these, in other words, in
Was
order
the
for us to
process on
modify
the
the
warrant
process, do we have
or-
to go back to the town?
If you want, you only have to go back to the town if you want to change this.
Right.
Change the code of ethics, not the
Change-
process.
Change the code of ethics or change the process. But interpreting and changing may be two different things.
Understand.
Okay?
Yeah,
Was the process on the warrant or only the code of ethics, do we know?
The whole
that?
thing.
and so my point as one of our parking lot issues moving forward is we're probably gonna wanna consider, do we want to prepare to make a list of potential changes that we would want to introduce in the next,
Certainly.
if we come across these
If there's things
inconsistencies.
that need changing,
Right. That would,
But there are also things that we may find are not here
that need to be
that need
added.
to be here.
Absolutely.
So it's possible that we would bring a warrant article forward for the next town meeting. That
Exactly.
certainly is possible. But I would hope that we would be able to do what we think needs to be done, interpreting these reasonably, so that that wouldn't be necessary. That would be my first
so
objective.
there's a yes and there, right? I do think we need to, as we come across these things that are sort of, not showstoppers, but concerns that we would like to be refined, we need to keep a tally of that as we get closer to town meeting to sort of work on that warrant. And I don't know, a subcommittee of 5 people is really like 2 people, but, like, we need someone who's gonna keep track of that. But additionally, Neil is absolutely correct. I think if we can agree on what our interpretation of that language is and act in good faith, we're not stuck, right?
I agree.
I feel like I'm all over the place. I'm so used to having a nice, pretty agenda that keeps me on track. One of the things we haven't talked about is a meeting cadence and a time and a scheduling, right? So, in the beginning, as we're working on this, do we need to meet more often, or do we want to stick with monthly but have more homework on a monthly cadence, or, I don't know, what are you guys thinking about for cadence of meetings?
I see there are two issues. First, we've got to establish our processes and procedures in doing all of this, and that will take X amount of time, and that needs to be done relatively soon. Don't want to
Correct.
drag that out for a
Right,
year.
right.
And then, once that's done, basically, we don't meet until something happens. A person raises an issue, or we see there's an issue that we feel that we have to address independently.
Or or we want to prepare for an education at the selectmen meeting, or we want to have an education with the town saying this is what like your spring meeting, right? Those kind of things can come up on a more not reactionary basis, but,
The other thing we may find as a result of whatever format and formulas and forms we use is that we want to meet monthly just to be available to people who want to come in,
Right.
rather than forcing them to contact Wendy and having Wendy call a meeting. And that meeting might last for 5 minutes
So
if no one showed up.
I would suggest that we at least plan on a monthly meeting for the first year, because I believe that there's plenty of work to be done in establishing the education process that's called out, you know. I do think we're gonna need to, you know, dispose of this spring question and maybe interpret widely what spring is, so that we can make, you know, it's gonna take some work to actually develop a meaningful product. And having been in bureaucracies, like I know several of us have been, you see a lot of products that are just like, all right, people are signing up, but they've never read it, they don't understand what's in it, it doesn't mean anything to them, it doesn't relate to their work. I think we can do better than that, and I think it would, you know,
Right.
that would be something we'd need to work on in this first year. The processes, and one of the ones that I'm really struck by, having done a lot of work in this area, is hearings. Right, when we do get to the point where we say, whatever, you know, we need to have a hearing, there's all kinds of complicated things that come up in here, like asking employees of the town to come and talk to us, insisting that employees of the town come and talk to us, other things like that, that we're gonna have a transparent and sustainable rationale for what the bar is that we actually initiate. So I think that's another huge bucket for the first year, is establish that process, the hearing, so you get the education piece, which is ongoing, so that we hopefully don't have them in the future, and then if we have a complaint that requires a hearing, what does that look like?
right, and I think all of those things are huge and won't be dealt with in one day, so we might
course.
want to sort of break up our discussion of the month or two discussions of the month, and have enough time for each of us to be prepared to figure out our thoughts and then have that discussion. For me, I hear hearing and I go, we're gonna have, like, lawyers and people are gonna have he said, she said, and all this. That sounds really bigger than our committee, but if that's what
You also have a couple of unions.
yeah, exactly. So that's not, we're not gonna be able to just call a hearing and have a union rep come in with a person and
But you know, and these are all discussion, like, huge discussion points around what does it really mean, and, you know, what, you know, there's influence, right, there's, decision-making, there's recommendations, there's lots of different things, whether or not they hold weight.
right.
So there's a lot of moving pieces here, but I think, you know, from my perspective, in order to even take a complaint, all of that has to be established so that people have informed consent
Agreed.
and understand what to expect from this committee. So we may be in a position of doing some work sessions from my perspective before, you know, and educating the town that we won't be in a position to really take complaint and be able to inform them what's going to happen with that complaint until we get some of these questions answered.
And I'd prefer not to drag this out. I would meet weekly or every other week until we resolve all of these issues. I don't want it to take a full year. And I'd like Eileen's suggestion, if I understood it correctly, that once we figured all of this out, we need to hold an information session to let everybody else know how this is going to work. Maybe conduct a mock hearing or a mock session on somebody who requests an advisory opinion, so that people understand what is actually going to happen if they decide to get involved in this area. But I'd like to do things sooner. I think we have a responsibility to the town to get this going quickly, rather than dragging it out. So from my point of view, if we're meeting Wednesday night, let's do it once a week, or if we have to, once every other week, until we resolve these things.
I think myself and Suzanne are out of town next week, are you?
I am
I
also.
will be coming up this week, yes.
So I'd be glad to start weekly in 2 weeks from now.
Sure.
Or every 2 weeks.
Is Wednesday,
Every other week would work well for me.
is Wednesday night a good night for everybody?
Well, you have to ask the cable committee. If Wednesday night is good on their schedule for the meeting room every week, it would be fine with me
It depends on if we're here every other week.
if we had,
When does the cable committee meet?
it met last week.
They meet once a week, once a month?
The first time in like 8 months.
I think,
They're down to 3, which is gonna be down to like 0 shortly.
And having met with them, that's the sense I got too, is they're kind of,
They're done.
Done.
they're kind of done. So what the questions I was asking them is, what does televised mean? It means something different than it did when, I'm sure, when they wrote the rule.
Sure.
You know, how, can we do YouTube, all of these sorts of things again, back to the asking forgiveness sometimes rather than permission. I'm
I
not
do
sure.
know, on the school board, we don't just do
Right, it's recorded and people
right,
can
and it's
access it.
posted on YouTube, yeah.
Right, so my point being, the technology is pretty simple. You know, my kids can do YouTube videos from the house.
8 watchers.
Alright, watchers. Okay, so,
So again, that just adds to the flexibility of where and when we can meet if
So I
this room
think-
is occupied.
right, so I think Naomi is the keeper of when this room is available.
The first, third, fourth Wednesday is always
First, third, fourth.
Are used.
are available.
Available.
The only one that's used is conservation on the second Wednesday.
So we could do,
3,
and the
17,
third.
24, 31, May.
Oh, stop it.
right, so but the
Now we
the
go to
fourth is next
calendar.
week, right?
What's that?
No, next week's school vacation week.
Right, so next week.
Next week is the 26th, the following week is the 3rd.
So there's the 3rd, the 17, 24, and 31 of May.
Okay,
Yeah,
does that fit people's calendars? Do you guys need to?
The
look at those?
17th I cannot do, the other days I can.
Well, you,
But again, we don't need everyone here, that's will be the reality of the committees, we're not gonna have everyone
Sure.
for every meeting, but.
Right,
do
so,
our best.
which,
so May 3rd would be our next meeting.
And then the 17th. And then the 31st. Now that's gonna hit
31st is Memorial Day, right?
Memorial Day weekend.
That's the weekend,
Weekend.
it's actually the Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesdays.
after.
Oh, okay,
It's a
right,
long one.
okay.
Okay, then,
Are you looking at bi-weekly, Suzanne?
yes. But then we're gonna have to make a jump, I think, because that second Wednesday is the one that's tied up, so.
Yeah, so you do 3, 17, 31, is that what you're meaning?
it's every other
Yes.
week.
Yeah, that's every other week, but
Is-
then we would have to jump to the, either the that would be, the second would be the 14th or the 21st.
Or we meet the first, third, and fourth Wednesdays of the month. And so sometimes
Fifth
it's,
is a bonus.
right, sometimes we have an extra month, especially if we're doing a bunch of,
Mondays.
I'm sorry, could you say that again for me?
I'm saying if we do the first, third, and fourth Wednesdays of the month, while we're working through this logistics, sometimes it'll be bi-weekly, sometimes it'll be weekly. And to Neil's point, we have a lot of work to do, and so
Agreed.
maybe not always staying at bi-weekly. And this aligns better with the town's, as an
Okay.
idea.
That's a
That sounds good.
schedule.
Okay.
Good start.
First, third, and fourth?
Yeah, Wednesdays,
So our next meeting will be
May
May
3rd.
3rd.
May 3rd.
Then, do you want the June ones?
So what we'll do is, we do the calendar next week for May, so we'll put you on. There's a lot of interest as you're up to 9 now. So I think you're gonna get a lot of education just watching the discussion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, one other thing that we should think about is having some sort of a information piece in Where in the World.
For sure, yes.
And I don't know whether that's starting now or once we've come to some conclusions. I don't,
I mean, we could almost do something quick saying we have a great foundation, but we need to sort of come up with a process before we start accepting complaints. Even a little blurb like that to sort of give a status
Yes.
might be useful. And then as we get through more hurdles, maybe we don't have everything figured out, but we figured out what our process is or how we report to the selectmen or those sorts of things. We could possibly have that sort of more ongoing.
that would be a good thing. You could, as you say, just a couple of lines.
Yeah.
So that everybody knows where we are and what to expect.
for me. Does that work with y'all?
Wendy, can I just, a blurb is great, I wonder if you should just let them know that it'll be available to live stream as we build the foundation.
Yes,
You know what I mean?
yes.
Just a catchy little,
Right.
and we're gonna be meeting first, and just.
Right, and so then if we're talking about the meeting cadence, and then a quick little
Yeah.
piece in there that says, look, we have great stuff, you can find a lot of this on the town page, maybe even give them links to some of these things, but we're not taking forms yet.
Naomi, does the Ethics Committee have a page in the
Yeah,
town website?
I created one for you, that's where your agenda was supposed to be.
Okay,
Excellent.
that's another place to put the same blurb that you put.
Yes, yep. And how do I add to our ethics, to our webpage? Is that somebody I go through, or do I do it myself?
Usually me or Beth.
Okay,
So just email it to
Send me
Naomi and
over
she'll,
what you want, and I upload it, just like the library does their agenda, and I upload it.
okay, well, agenda for sure.
Yeah, and if you have a cancellation, please let me, and I can throw it in the red alert, so that people know.
Okay, all right,
If for some reason someone's sick and someone's out of town, you don't have 3, just let me
Right.
know, and I can throw it up there.
oh, that brings up another, my brain's like, so, there's a lot of rules around what we can talk about outside of this place, if, when we're a quorum, even if it's an email or a Word document, a Google Doc, right? In the school, we can't, 3 of us can't work on the same Google Doc, because at that point, that's a meeting. I don't know if the town committees have that same sort of restrictions?
We do.
yes.
Okay, so I said something when we were talking about being in here, I'm like, only reason I'm saying something is because the exception with the school boards is if you're having a discussion for when you're gonna meet, that doesn't have to be a notice meeting, right? So that's how we were able to all have that discussion when we were picking this time. But if we were having other topics around what we think respect means, we couldn't have that as 3 or more of us together, right, outside of this meeting.
But,
But,
and this is a question, let's assume that I find out the question that was raised. Did the first committee actually have any complaints that they dealt with? And what's the record? Okay? And let's assume I get an answer to that.
yes,
May I, without violating the right to know law, may I communicate that with everyone? And that's the end of it. In other words,
You
you don't
can-
respond.
you can communicate, someone can write you back one-on-one, but when it becomes a two-way discussion as a group, then we violate it. So, right, so no reply is all. You can share information, one way. If you have a question or something you need to directly talk to Neil, that's okay. But when we all start, even an email, that's beyond the rules.
And just so you know, your email is going to be subject to the right to know law.
Correct,
I was gonna ask.
Not
if
your
it's-
oral conversation,
correct.
but your email is subject to the right to know law. So anything that you put in an email that relates to this issue, not just to a committee member, but maybe to a member of the public, is likely to be subject to that. So
And I guess,
Fore-
I think, I know
forewarned
what
is
Eileen's
forearmed.
gonna ask, so go ahead, and then I'll see.
I was gonna see if it's possible as elected officials, if we could get town emails, because I
Please.
think it would be
I don't know, is
cleaner.
that something we can do, Naomi?
that's a good idea.
Well, we're doing a conversion tomorrow, so we'll see if it crashes and burns.
Okay, well, not tomorrow, but, because that's what we would do on school board, right? Is you have a separate email, because once there's a right to know, they're welcome to everything on your email, right? And so if it's everything on our ethics committee, okay, that's one thing, but it's everything that has ever gone out of my private email, that's a lot more scope, right? So
No, it doesn't include that.
it does, if you write it from your home.
Yes, it includes that one email, not that,
It opens up.
It opens it up that they can look for other things.
you're sure?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's why we have that firm division, at least in the school board. The legal advice has been to never use your private email, because then they're allowed to go beyond that.
Once, so I would also add that because we hadn't convened yet, and we had not received any briefing on these limitations, right to
Correct.
know and all of that our previous discussions arranging for this meeting are fine.
Right.
But moving forward, we'd have to
Correct.
respect those processes.
Right. And to
But I
know-
do agree, we should definitely have a town email that we use just for this business.
Right, particularly because this is going to be, this is gonna have a lot of interest, thank y'all for being here. And anyone who has been on social media, things tend to blow up and blow down and get out of someone's interpretation is not someone else's interpretation. In ethics is where we sort of draw those lines and sort of figure these pieces out, right? So somebody's going to be unhappy at some point. So if we can keep that work separate from our parenting work and our work, that would be lovely.
So there was, official requests to see if members of the Ethics Committee could have town-related emails for the purposes of this committee.
Correct. That's a great minute. And I assume that as far as by our next meeting, would that be a reasonable timeline? 'Cause I-
There's a cost to every email.
Sure. And that's another thing, we don't have a budget, right? So do we have to go before the selectmen and say, we would like an email and make that request?
I mean, I can ask that for you.
Okay. Okay,
There's a cost to the town for,
Every single email. Every email address that I have, I pay monthly for it.
is it the address or the number of emails?
I believe it's the address. So I set up conservation, so it says conservation chair add. And then when he replies to citizens, they see where chair add. So I gave them one. The planning board, the zoning board hasn't asked.
How much does it cost, you know?
I think it's like $5 or $6 a month.
really? That's crazy.
Who's your
From
server?
Code Protection.
Who's the server?
We've got a contract with Umbrel Technologies.
I know that's beyond the scope of the ethics committee, but that's crazy, okay.
So, at $5 a month, at $60 a year, times 5 is $300 a year, times 10 years, 20 years, my God.
So in the meantime,
There's protections with it too. I mean, I don't know what yours is gonna be. Ours has protections with spyware and everything else. You know what I mean? So, all the other crap that comes with it.
There are obviously tons of email servers out there. I've used several, but again, I do think this is out of the scope of this group. I do think that there's a problem with financing in the town on how that, but
No.
nevertheless, what I would say is we need emails.
Yes.
correct.
So whatever the process is for getting them,
And also, to the discussion about what the protections are that are in place, we've talked a lot about people's confidentiality, their reputations, and so having a protected server where people are reporting in things that are probably pretty sensitive to them, I think, my 2 cents.
Great, so Naomi, if you can ask the selectmen, if you need me to come speak to why that's important, I could do that. In the meantime, if they say no when we lose, it's easy enough to set up another Gmail account or another My GSC.
That's what a lot of some of the planning boards set it up, and that's their planning board email.
Well, there's the public planning board, right? There's the chairperson, there's a complaints for ethics committee email. That's the outward facing one. But as we have, if you're sharing information with the rest of us or those sort of pieces, we want to segregate that from our personal one.
So, Eileen, if each of us sets up a new account, let's say with Gmail.
Sure.
So, neil/ethicscommittee@gmail.com. And then I communicate with the board. And somebody files a right-to-know request. They would get all of the emails at that account, but not the emails at my
Correct.
personal account.
Correct.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's,
We have option A, option B.
yes.
Yeah.
I was going protection, ease of use, because if somebody's looking for us, through the town, the emails are usually linked, that sort of thing. But if it's cost prohibitive, we've got a plan B.
Well, and the other thing we have, like on the school board, we had a school board at SAU 24, or Weare School Board, and that could be then forwarded to the
Yes.
members, right? So that's a way for them to reach all of us. If they want our individual emails, you're right, they're not linked if they're not.
But at the very least, the chairman needs to have a public Weare
Same.
email
For
so that,
someone to send something.
exactly.
What did I sign up sorry. Yes, they do need a place to reach out. Okay, so we have a meeting. We need to work on building the agenda and what our priorities are for tackling this giant pile. And that we can do in email certainly if we have ideas of priorities of what we want to start with next time, we can certainly do that now. Or if you have amendments to the agenda, you can always send them to me and I can keep moving that forward as well.
I am going to set up a separate email. So please do not use any other email of mine that you might have for this kind of business.
There you go.
Personal stuff, you're welcome to use it.
There you have it.
Yeah, we actually had a lawyer come speak to us on the school board for that, and it was pretty terrifying. I think a simple right-to-know request, the person doesn't have right to all your information, but if there is a lawsuit brought, they have a right to all of your information from
But,
that.
yeah, discovery's
Yeah.
there. But, so, I don't know what time we're scheduled to go till tonight. We didn't discuss that.
It's open-ended, could be midnight.
Right, well, one of the things I think we need to talk about norms in the meeting is how long do we intend to go? You can always extend it, you can always finish early, but that way we can all plan around it. But what I did in leading up to this was to review all of this and come up with some questions, some of which we already addressed, but I'd like to get some of these sort of onto our agenda moving forward if
Sure.
we could. So one of them was confidentiality.
Yep.
And the differences between confidentiality as far as the board, and if you look under the employees' confidential information, I will not disclose any confidential information. I think definitions are in order. What is confidential information for us and for the employees in the town? Another one, the disclosure and the recusal determination, it talks about that they will or shall disclose, where am I gonna get to? Here it is, under honesty. I will disclose any matters that present a conflict of information and will recuse myself when appropriate. When appropriate is obviously a big issue, but moreover, I will disclose any matters that might present a conflict of interest. To whom, and what does that mean? I will disclose, now, to me, it's very clear that if I were, again, in a fiduciary position in the town, and let's say I'm purchasing salt to put on the roads, and I happen to own the salt company, that's a significant disclosure. But I'm not sure how we define that, and I think that needs to get nailed down.
Right, I think when you're talking committees, clearly it's within that scope of the committee, but employees, that's totally different, right? Do you go to HR, do you go to your manager?
Right, what is the disclosure
And is
process?
there do you have a process of employees when you handle all of those sorts of issues? Or do you know?
Well, do we establish what a conflict of interest is for the employees?
Or are we beyond the scope of our meeting, of our group? I'm not sure.
Let me offer some experience in this. This is very general.
Yes,
If you define it, I can guarantee you your definition will be subject to all sorts of misinterpretation, no matter what your definition is. And what will happen is that somebody will come up with a situation which your definition doesn't cover, and will therefore say, I'm not violating the guidelines. So whenever you write a rule, there are unintended consequences to that. The other approach, rather than trying to define everything and have everything clear in a rule, is to do what the judiciary does and establish case law. So in effect, somebody comes in with a situation that involves conflict of interest. And we look at that situation and we say, yes or no, this isn't a conflict of interest. And now the definition of conflict of interest takes on a particular context.
Based on the precedent?
And it becomes precedent. But it doesn't obligate us in any way in other cases. The one thing I know is that as bright as we may be and as hard as we may work at this and as much good advice as we get, we are never going to be able to define terms in a way that covers all sorts of situations. So sometimes ambiguity is an advantage. It allows us to deal individually with situations as they arise, and then after a period of years or decades, you've got a body of cases which inform everyone as to what this really means without obligating you to have foreseen the future and to find everything in advance, because we can't do that. We're not capable.
In the amended add-on to that, keeping ourselves in our place, we're saying this is important, and we'll hear these concerns. It also, the selectmen have a right to set the process by where they have a disclosure process. We're not trying to oversee or force them to do it a certain way. We're just saying that you need to make sure you have the ability to handle it. And they may handle it differently than the finance committee, which may handle it differently than the people who are mowing the lawns, right?
So, my feedback would be that there are two sides to that same coin, and that if you water down or you leave it so ambiguous as that it's jello, then your ethics committee is meaningless. That if you don't, because they can say, well, that's not it. I felt no need to disclose the gift I just got from this billionaire. Those are, while I respect and I appreciate, I have experience, as Neil does, with the same thing, I do think that it's not one or the other. Total ambiguity can be as sinful as nailing it down too clearly. I just think we as a group, one of the things that I've found helpful is having a discussion among the group, if not to come to consensus, at least to have aired and that'll be part of the discussion process as we go through any of these. But what I have to say, Neil, that I do strongly feel in opposition to what you raised is the 5 to 10 years before we're developing a body of evidence to be able to, if we wait that long to be able to say this is or is not supportive of the current policy, I think we'll have the same fate as the previous committee, which we will
Sure.
die of a lack of interest.
I look forward to seeing your definition of all of the terms that you think are vague.
But
Excellent.
there's the black and there's white, and then there's where I live, which is in the gray. And so we could, as a committee, have guidelines that say we believe each committee should have a process whereby they police themselves for disclosure, like, and confidentiality, and set that up, and that where we would put it is blah, blah, blah. But there's no way we're gonna come up with every particular situation. We just won't. We couldn't even do it for this committee, right? Everything that I need to disclose, everything Eileen needs to disclose,
But our thought processes could inform our educational pieces.
Correct, and having a discussion about it, I
Right.
think is very valuable. But to Neil's point, I don't think we're gonna come up with a checklist that says, these are the things you need to disclose at each meeting. Because look, even if we had an agenda, we'd be all over the place, because that's what these discussions go to. So I can't tell you at the start of the meeting if there's something I need to disclose, always, right? So,
But it's the, it's the process with each one, right? When, so when cases are heard, right, and you're selecting jury, they're rolling through a series of questions to identify, what will be a
potential. Yeah,
potential, right,
Right.
or
And so-
bias. So it's not set forward beforehand necessarily, but it's the litmus test that you put yourself through.
Right, so part of the education process, we may come up with a list of these are the
Yeah.
things to consider.
Yes.
And use that as part of the education piece, as opposed to saying, these are all
These are the ones
rules.
that are gonna roll
Right.
you out from
Right.
the onset. I think it's a process with each case, and is case dependent, I think, is what Neil is getting at, that, but perhaps a set of guiding questions could be developed
Yeah.
that help us root it out, don't necessarily rule it out, but help us get clearer and help other people get clearer, which I think is the whole goal.
Right, I think that would be a useful agenda item. All right, so confidentiality, disclosure, what other major ones did you have?
Okay, so one of the things that I ran into is there's a part in here that says that the board will produce a written statement, for lack of a better term, when requested by the selectmen, which we have a form for. But then when you look at the the second page here, it says that the board shall always, within 30 days of concluding investigation, shall issue a written statement setting forth its findings. So when I read the first part about the select board, I thought, well, then that really says that we don't issue any written advice or positions until requested. But that's not what section D, what is that?
5?
5
Yep.
suggests.
All right, so, right, I first hear that they may want a status from us or whatever, and we provide that in writing. Every time we make a decision, we have something in writing. But I think, to your point, how we document our decisions and how we communicate with the selectmen on what cadence, and that's definitely an agenda item.
Well, under inquiries is where we need to look. It says the Ethics Committee shall establish a mechanism by which officials, board members, employees, and residents of the town may obtain advice and counsel, interesting phrasing, from the committee regarding ethical issues that may arise. Upon request of a town official, board member, or employee, the Ethics Committee may issue a written advisory opinion in response to such an inquiry. And then we shall issue one,
If there was a complaint.
If that was a
We have two
findings.
forms,
including an
And that complaints are
investigation.
two
an
different.
advisory form, somebody wants an advisory opinion, a
Yep.
written one, and we would respond. And then somebody actually files a formal complaint, doesn't come in to talk to us about this, that, and the other thing, they are going through the full process, and then they file this. Once they file this complaint, we have an obligation within 30 days to reach a decision and whatever section 5 said.
In 30 days of concluding the investigation. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense then, thank you. That's the clarifying information I was looking for on that one.
And I do think if we're following those rules and we say we will give information to the select board if they request, we need to communicate to them that we're expecting them to start that conversation versus we regularly report to them. So our communication with the select board is definitely something we need to firm up. Do you have anything else?
The only other note I had was procedures, because there
Right.
seems like there's a
Well,
lot
and I
of that.
think to some of those questions you brought up, there's, a code of ethics is very high level on purpose, right? This is utopia, how we should all behave in society, right? How you make sure people are properly encouraging public engagement in our decision-making process and support the public's rights to know, right? That's, we want to be fair. The procedure may be, we're always broadcasting unless it's non-public, right? So where do those procedures live, and what are the ones that we are recommending, and that whole thing? The procedure piece is huge, right?
Right.
Procedures versus policies, right? Okay, does anybody else have future agenda topics, the things that you think we should tackle?
Oh, I think just doing that will take us a while.
A
and
long time,
other-
right?
And others will pop up in the
Sure.
process of doing that.
So probably they will all be on May 3rd. I'll keep a running list on some shared document.
The only other concern that I had, and it's a minor one, but I do think we should address it, in section A3, the formation of the Ethics Committee. Obviously, this committee was formed once before and expired, but the language in the, that was voted on by the town suggests that they would fill these open positions for 3-year terms after that. Now, I understand they created that in order to set up a staggering of the positions. We didn't do that. We didn't, or when we started this again, we went back to the 2007 process.
1, the 2, and the 3.
Right, but moving forward, I just think we need to make sure that the town is aware that every year when somebody vacates the 1-year positions, for example, those
Becomes
will
a
be,
3-year
it
position.
becomes a
Yep,
3-year
yep.
position moving forward, that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that diminishes your timeframes too.
Right.
3 and 2.
And 3
Right.
is a good,
Makes sense.
3 is, that's what school board does. That's enough time so you get your feet wet, you get your understanding, but you're not there so long that people are tired of your face.
And it is important to have a
Absolutely.
cycle, so you don't lose all of your group at
Yeah,
once.
yes, and not all at the same time.
Right.
So it looks like, when I just briefly look through this, We know that, the implementation, that was kind of set forth. B being the education, almost like that piece probably is going to have to be our last piece, because we need to figure out
For sure.
inquiries and complaints, and then we can provide education to everybody.
After we educate ourselves, you mean?
Yes, so, that is just my suggestion about,
Yeah, but almost, so inquiries and complaints are really quickly, right? Because we need to have that process, but we also have to have our ducks in a row enough to say that we can handle an inquiry, right, if someone puts one in. So,
And one other question, just for my own edification here on the ethics code violation complaint, the last sentence, "I've exhausted all other avenues to resolve the situation that are available within the town government." What are those?
right,
that'll be part of the education.
that's a huge piece, right?
There you go.
Because,
Because I can see that coming up, then where somebody will protest that somebody didn't follow all of the
Sure.
processes,
Right.
and therefore
They
it's
need
the
to be
wrong forum.
extremely visible,
Right.
like on the town page, based on if it's an employee or a committee member, and it needs to be consistent, right? All these different committees can't have their own process. So there's nothing in here about regularly reporting to the select board, right? They have to ask and we give it, that's good.
I don't believe, well, we're elected on our own, we're not appointed by the select board, so although I think it's a great policy to openly communicate and have everything available on the website, so if they have questions, they know where to begin.
Well, I just feel like once we have a ruling that
Wendy,
says,
it doesn't say, this is interesting, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it says, within 30 days of concluding an investigation into a written complaint, the Ethics Committee shall issue a written statement setting forth its findings.
to who?
It doesn't say to who.
Right, or
So
what the next steps
It could be to the
are.
complainant, it could be to,
Right.
it does say that both the person who's filing the complaint as well as the person who the complaint is about have right to know
Right,
that that's happening.
but say we say there's a violation, if we just tell those two people, that doesn't solve anything, right? So, so that reporting piece is, something we need to tackle. And I get it, that you don't necessarily say it goes to selectmen, because maybe it's an employee that should go to HR, or maybe, like, there should be some body that the results go to. Sorry, Neil, go ahead.
Is the finding, the statement setting forth its findings, is that public?
I would assume so.
It's a right to, oh, well, it's
I think we
interesting,
have to-
because
We have to be subject to the situation, I would think.
if it's
If it's a
Well-
personal-
confidential, because it
yeah.
was, then it is not right to know, but we have to define what's confidential.
How, I would submit that the decision, without the underlying details, would be public. That there may be details that wouldn't be part of the public-facing side of that decision.
So the board finds that John Smith acted unethically. That's the finding,
Perhaps.
and that goes public.
No.
Or,
So-
or the-
John Smith is going to be very upset by that.
Correct. So
well,
what we,
sure, anybody that's found having violated it.
but
probably
it's
not
just
gonna
our opinion, we're not lawyers, it hasn't gone to, right. So what we do in the school board, if there's a concern about an employee member that's in non-public, if we have to vote on something, it's very generic, it doesn't have that person's name in it, if a non-public kind of issue. So I think we need to nail down what is gonna be public information.
Case number A3, the subject, the complainant.
There was a complaint about fairness in an employee in town, and in public, we voted that, yes, we believe that we should send our concern to HR or to the lawyer to do their next thing, because we have no right, I mean, we don't have any power to do anything, right?
All we can do is issue a written report,
Right,
that's it. But that's not without power.
sure.
That's,
Yeah.
the
And in
folks
fact, I
who
think
are
Neil's
looking
point
at
is
this
it's
right
a lot
now.
of power, because you can destroy someone's life in a small town just by saying, we think this guy was a poopy pants.
Sure,
Yeah.
So that list of questions to be generated it would be my recommendation, once we dial in on those, that if we can't solve them within this group, or we don't come to some consensus in this group, that would be the bulk of information that we do ask the question about.
So ethics code implementation will be our next agenda.
Right, the implementation of what we do. That's a huge one, right? All right, so,
I'm Googling to see if I can find ethics committee report.
oh, there's actually quite a few, not ours, but other ones.
Oh, yes. Oh.
Would you say for me to, I'd like to interject as far as the timeframes of our meetings, to keep it between 7 and 8:30?
Oh,
Does that sound appropriate?
oh, thank you to bring that back. That's,
Yes.
good job, you did this job. So Luke had asked, we should set an expected length of time, and so you're proposing like an hour to an hour and a half meeting that we could extend if we have more.
If we need to, yeah. The other question is, could anyone meet at 6 versus 7?
Your bedtime is earlier?
Yes.
Mine is.
Naomi, is there anyone here at 6?
Well, Wednesdays, don't go to till 7. That's why 7 worked best for finance.
Okay.
They could get here before the door got locked.
I see.
I have no problem with 6.
No problem?
6
I
works for
don't.
me.
Okay. Eileen?
I think 90% of the time that's gonna be fine. If
Okay.
I'm gonna be late, I will let you
Sure.
know. Sometimes things happen.
So 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock sounds good, and then we can wrap it up by 7:30?
Oh, no, whoa, I went to 6 because that gives us 2.5 hours.
Okay, we've got.
This is negotiation time,
The,
yeah.
the problem is that when you get going on these things, you can't do it in an hour and a half. You really can't.
Well, I'm just saying, for us to at least try to frame in our time.
How about 2
So-
hours?
Yeah, I'm
2
saying
hours,
8.
starting
Wrap it at 2?
6 to 8?
6 to 8, yeah, that we can do.
Okay.
Okay.
So Eileen, you mentioned something about you'd let us know. I will email you all my phone number if you need to, or, because if I'm driving, I'm not gonna necessarily know, but if you send me a text, I'll get it. Because if I said it out loud, then 9 people would have it.
Well,
12.
So, as a suggestion for agendas moving forward,
Yes.
what I would suggest in the beginning is that we have an agenda item for each, for A, B, C, and D, as a sort of a standing agenda item, and then we can just talk about updates for each one, breaking those out.
At the risk of being overly, I was gonna say, do we want someone to be the point person for those 4 topics? And then we go through them kind of like a committee report within a thing, but maybe that's just too formal, that's fine. So you're saying that education inquiries, complaints,
Right, what I'm suggesting is there's work to be done in each of these areas. Each one of them. There will probably be some volunteers or voluntolds from the group who work on subheading of this and then report back to the committee. What I understand is we can meet in 2s, not in 3s, and it's not a violation, so I would respectfully suggest that your or your working groups be 2, so that we can take things out, discuss them offline, bring it back to the meeting, and then report out, and that way it just moves the agenda more quickly for you.
right,
when we
and I
get
mean, in
together.
general, like, if we're gonna have those as standing agenda items, and they're
At least in the beginning.
Sure, if we do that, we would have to have someone doing the prep work, because otherwise we'll get stuck in A, and we'll never get to B, C, D, right, in 2 hours. Or we rotate them each time so that there's a different one on top. All right, so just because, well, I can make this Eileen's problem, but I think it comes down to me. So the standing topics you have, I mean, because I wrote confidential disclosure, procedure, education, reporting, but the ones that you're pointing to are, the formation of the committee, education, inquiries, complaints, were those the?
Right, yeah.
Well, yeah, so A is frankly done,
Uh-huh.
right? So we could probably skip that one. There's not really anything left to do in that, but just education, inquiries, complaints.
And then something about, these standing definitions, these vague definitions, that could fall under education, I guess, the confidentiality, disclosure discussions that we're talking about. Are there,
And as Neil pointed out, we may more fully develop our consensus on those as we start breaking down the issues here. We don't necessarily have to go out for a readout until we understand what we're looking for.
so as we mark up an agenda, we have to sort of vote on the minutes of the last meeting, right? That's always first. And then standing committees that don't have, so perhaps one of the first things that we'll do, if the consensus, if the group believes we should have a point person for these things to sort of tackle that, maybe think about it for our next meeting. If you're drawn to one or the other, so we can make that assignment next time.
Sounds good. I think once we start breaking it out.
Yeah.
it'll become apparent.
All right. All right, and then, so for homework, obviously, you're reading all these forms, and Neil will get us some information from his person.
As soon as I have a new email account.
Yes, exactly. See how scary it is?
One last picayune point. Under B, it goes from 1 to 3.
I saw that. I wondered if there was like,
That's
the
what,
second paragraph was a 2.
we're supposed to be
or-
a 2, and it just got, is
Yeah.
that a separate line item? I don't know.
See, that's why you should be secretary.
Which one was this, Lou?
Under education,
So
It goes
they just
1
didn't
and
put
then
the
3.
there's no 2, right,
Yeah,
right,
next to that, the ethics committee shall hold meetings.
exactly.
Yeah, that would be a 2.
And one would hope, in my experience, sometimes what happens is there's discussion, somebody took something out, and they just forgot to update the number. All right. Do we have any blank forms that I could sign tonight?
I know, but it's, I really want you to sign this blank form. but I'm
Yeah,
not
you can
sure-
Oh,
sign
did
the
you
one
have
that
one
you
right
have.
Oh, I've got a blank form, you should get one in your packet, I think.
Oh, there it is, yep, I got it, there you go. Woo-hoo.
Neil's gonna be shocked. There's 3 of us that haven't signed one of these. I have read it.
My process was I always got sworn in, and then somebody handed me the form, and I signed it, and I handed it back.
No, I went into the town
Oh,
office,
yeah, I did sign a form too,
just, and I
when I got sworn in.
sworn in, but I didn't see this form. But it could have
That's
been,
okay, I'll
she was
do it
busy.
again, just to be on the safe
It's
side.
been my process every time
I signed the, that I swore in, but I didn't sign this form. But I did now.
So,
Can we take it and I'm gonna sign it?
I don't know, it's
that's,
supposed to
that's a
go,
good question, is who keeps these forms?
Who keeps these now?
For the committees?
Can we get them to you?
town clerk keeps them, I think, but,
We can put them in our box.
that's good, because we should,
walk the talk.
yes, exactly. And, yeah.
Cross the Ts and dot the Is.
Yeah. Do we have any other business we want to discuss for tonight?
Nope, it's very nice to meet all of you.
Yeah. I'm super excited. I think this is a
No,
great group.
That's interesting. We didn't introduce ourselves because I think we each know each other
I
one
don't
way or
know-
another.
I don't know Eileen, but hello Eileen.
I think
I'm
you taught
Suzanne
one of my
Howard.
kids how to swim.
I probably did.
I think you did.
I probably did. I
Yeah.
know, I've been responsible for many in this
Yeah,
town.
I'm pretty sure you did.
Both mine.
I knew who you were, so.
There you go.
There you
Well,
have it.
the same, through my daughter,
Yes.
Eileen. so,
Oh, okay.
yes.
Aha,
She's the, oh God, here in my brain.
Supervisor.
supervisor
That's the
checklist, yes.
Yes. I know she's in year 11. I think she's reaching her toasted point
Mm-hmm.
too, so.
Wow. So, process, like school board process, we have to vote to end the meeting, make a motion.
No.
I failed.
Just so you know,
Modified
that as chairman, you just simply,
So we're done?
the meeting is adjourned. You don't have to have a formal vote.
Okay,
That's one of your prerogatives.
okay,
That's modification.
okay.
And if you decide, for example, that we're operating by, if we were all in agreement on something, we've come to consensus, you don't have to have a formal vote.
Right, right. That's
The
kind of
minutes
what the
would reflect-
guidelines I was looking for in the
Right.
beginning, like how,
If something has to be acted on, and there is no consensus, then you probably want to have a formal vote. It's 3-2 in favor.
Can any member call for a vote? Is
Sure.
another question. Yeah, so just norms of the meetings. And those are things that, as was pointed out, we'll develop through precedent of our own.
right, and just
Can
working together
modify.
as a group. All right, so bye to the 12 of you. This meeting, this first meeting of the second run of the Ethics Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you. And you'll notice what time it is, madam?